The next morning she woke up early, long before the sun had fully risen. The memory of the letters still filled her thoughts as if the words had burned themselves into her mind. Every sentence her mother had written carried emotion, love, regret, and something else she couldn't yet name. She wanted to ask questions, but she didn't know where to start. The elderly woman who owned the house seemed kind yet distant, as if she too carried secrets buried deep within her heart. When she arrived at work, the air felt different. The house seemed alive, aware of her discovery. Every sound, the ticking of the old clock, the creak of the wooden stairs, the rustle of the curtains, seemed to whisper something to her. She moved carefully, unsure if she should act normal or confront what she had found. The older woman noticed her quietness during breakfast. "You look troubled, dear," she said gently, pouring tea into a china cup. "Is everything all right?" She hesitated, unsure whether to tell her about the attic and the letters. Her heart said yes, but her fear told her to wait. So she smiled faintly and replied, "Just didn't sleep much?" The older woman nodded but watched her for a moment longer, as though she saw right through the small lie. The silence between them carried meaning, but neither spoke further. As the day went on, she continued cleaning, but her eyes kept drifting to the attic door. She wanted to go back, to explore more, to understand what had happened all those years ago, but she also knew she needed to be careful. The truth, once uncovered, couldn't be undone. And something told her that the truth here wasn't just about property or inheritance. It was about people, choices, and a past that had been hidden for a reason. In the afternoon, the elderly woman asked her to help sort through an old chest in the sitting room. It was filled with keepsakes, letters, photographs, and small trinkets. As she dusted off each item, she noticed patterns. Some faces in the photographs were the same ones she had seen in the attic. Her fingers brushed over one picture and her breath caught. The woman in the photo was the same as the one sitting beside her now, only younger. And next to her stood a man she didn't recognize but whose eyes looked strangely familiar. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. The elderly woman looked down at the photograph for a long moment before answering. "That's me," she said softly. "And that was my brother." She paused, her gaze distant. "We lived here many years ago before life took us in different directions." Something in her voice trembled, and the young woman felt a pang of empathy. She wanted to ask more, but she could sense that this was a painful subject, so she let it rest, though her curiosity only deepened. Could this brother somehow be connected to her family, to her own past? As the days passed, she began to notice subtle changes in the way the older woman treated her. There were moments when she looked at her with a strange, almost knowing expression. Sometimes she would start to say something, only to stop herself. It was as if both of them were circling around a truth neither dared to speak aloud. One evening, while cleaning the hallway, she heard faint music coming from one of the closed rooms. The melody was soft, played on an old piano that hadn't been touched since she started working there. She followed the sound quietly and peeked inside. The older woman was sitting at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as they pressed the keys. The music was beautiful but filled with sorrow. When the last note faded, the woman looked up and said, "You can come in, dear." She stepped inside, unsure of what to say. The older woman smiled faintly. "This was my mother's favorite song. She used to play it every evening when the house was full of laughter." She paused, her eyes glistening. "Everything changed after my brother left. We lost touch, and I never saw him again." Her heart tightened. The mention of the brother again stirred something inside her. She wondered if that lost brother had anything to do with the letters upstairs. The thought frightened her, yet she couldn't let it go. Later that night, when she returned to her small apartment, she couldn't sleep. The puzzle pieces were floating around her mind, waiting to be connected. The letters with her name, the photographs, the older woman's brother, it all had to mean something. The feeling of belonging she had when she first saw the house now made sense, but she needed proof. She decided that the next day she would go back into the attic no matter what. When morning came, she arrived early again, hoping the older woman would be out in the garden. Once the coast was clear, she climbed the narrow stairs leading to the attic. The air was still and heavy, carrying the scent of dust and time. She opened the small wooden box again and reread the letters. Each one spoke of love and longing. Her mother had written about a brother who lived far away, about losing contact after a terrible misunderstanding, and about a home she once hoped to return to. There was also mention of a child, her, the one who might one day come looking for her roots. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized what it all meant. The elderly woman downstairs wasn't just her employer. She was family. Her mother's sister. The house had once belonged to both of them, before life had pulled them apart. Her mind spun as she tried to decide what to do. Should she tell her the truth? Would it bring joy or reopen old wounds? She knew the truth was powerful, but it could also be painful, and yet she couldn't keep it hidden. The house had brought her here for a reason. She closed the box gently and looked around the attic one more time. The sunlight streamed through the small window, falling across the floorboards where she sat. She felt something deep inside her, a quiet certainty that everything was happening exactly as it was meant to. Fate, or something like it, had guided her steps to this place. Downstairs, she heard the front door open and close. The older woman's voice floated up faintly, calling her name. She wiped her tears, steadied her breathing, and walked down the stairs, her heart beating fast. She didn't know how to begin, but she knew that this was the moment everything would start to change. The woman met her at the bottom of the stairs, holding a photograph in her hand. Her eyes were soft but filled with questions. "I think we need to talk," she said quietly. And in that instant, both women knew. The truth they had been circling around had finally found them. The next morning, she woke up early, long before the sun had fully risen. The memory of the letters still filled her thoughts as if the words had burned themselves into her mind. Every sentence her mother had written carried emotion, love, regret, and something else she couldn't yet name. She wanted to ask questions, but she didn't know where to start. The elderly woman who owned the house seemed kind yet distant, as if she too carried secrets buried deep within her heart. When she arrived at work, the air felt different. The house seemed alive, aware of her discovery. Every sound, the ticking of the old clock, the creak of the wooden stairs, the rustle of the curtains, seemed to whisper something to her. She moved carefully, unsure if she should act normal or confront what she had found. The older woman noticed her quietness during breakfast. "You look troubled, dear," she said gently, pouring tea into a china cup. "Is everything all right?" She hesitated, unsure whether to tell her about the attic and the letters. Her heart said yes, but her fear told her to wait. So she smiled faintly and replied, "Just didn't sleep much?" The older woman nodded but watched her for a moment longer, as though she saw right through the small lie. The silence between them carried meaning, but neither spoke further. As the day went on, she continued cleaning, but her eyes kept drifting to the attic door. She wanted to go back, to explore more, to understand what had happened all those years ago, but she also knew she needed to be careful. The truth, once uncovered, couldn't be undone. And something told her that the truth here wasn't just about property or inheritance. It was about people, choices, and a past that had been hidden for a reason. In the afternoon, the elderly woman asked her to help sort through an old chest in the sitting room. It was filled with keepsakes, letters, photographs, and small trinkets. As she dusted off each item, she noticed patterns. Some faces in the photographs were the same ones she had seen in the attic. Her fingers brushed over one picture and her breath caught. The woman in the photo was the same as the one sitting beside her now, only younger. And next to her stood a man she didn't recognize but whose eyes looked strangely familiar. "Who are they?" she asked quietly. The elderly woman looked down at the photograph for a long moment before answering. "That's me," she said softly. "And that was my brother." She paused, her gaze distant. "We lived here many years ago before life took us in different directions." Something in her voice trembled, and the young woman felt a pang of empathy. She wanted to ask more, but she could sense that this was a painful subject, so she let it rest, though her curiosity only deepened. Could this brother somehow be connected to her family, to her own past? As the days passed, she began to notice subtle changes in the way the older woman treated her. There were moments when she looked at her with a strange, almost knowing expression. Sometimes she would start to say something, only to stop herself. It was as if both of them were circling around a truth neither dared to speak aloud. One evening, while cleaning the hallway, she heard faint music coming from one of the closed rooms. The melody was soft, played on an old piano that hadn't been touched since she started working there. She followed the sound quietly and peeked inside. The older woman was sitting at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as they pressed the keys. The music was beautiful but filled with sorrow. When the last note faded, the woman looked up and said, "You can come in, dear." She stepped inside, unsure of what to say. The older woman smiled faintly. This was my mother's favorite song. She used to play it every evening when the house was full of laughter. She paused, her eyes glistening. Everything changed after my brother left. We lost touch, and I never saw him again. Her heart tightened. The mention of the brother again stirred something inside her. She wondered if that lost brother had anything to do with the letters upstairs. The thought frightened her, yet she couldn't let it go. Later that night, when she returned to her small apartment, she couldn't sleep. The puzzle pieces were floating around her mind, waiting to be connected. The letters with her name, the photographs, the older woman's brother, it all had to mean something. The feeling of belonging she had when she first saw the house now made sense, but she needed proof. She decided that the next day she would go back into the attic no matter what. When morning came, she arrived early again, hoping the older woman would be out in the garden. Once the coast was clear, she climbed the narrow stairs leading to the attic. The air was still and heavy, carrying the scent of dust and time. She opened the small wooden box again and reread the letters. Each one spoke of love and longing. Her mother had written about a brother who lived far away, about losing contact after a terrible misunderstanding, and about a home she once hoped to return to. There was also mention of a child, her, the one who might one day come looking for her roots. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized what it all meant. The elderly woman downstairs wasn't just her employer. She was family, her mother's sister. The house had once belonged to both of them, before life had pulled them apart. Her mind spun as she tried to decide what to do. Should she tell her the truth? Would it bring joy or reopen old wounds? She knew the truth was powerful, but it could also be painful, and yet she couldn't keep it hidden. The house had brought her here for a reason. She closed the box gently and looked around the attic one more time. The sunlight streamed through the small window, falling across the floorboards where she sat. She felt something deep inside her, a quiet certainty that everything was happening exactly as it was meant to. Fate, or something like it, had guided her steps to this place. Downstairs, she heard the front door open and close. The older woman's voice floated up faintly, calling her name. She wiped her tears, steadied her breathing, and walked down the stairs, her heart beating fast. She didn't know how to begin, but she knew that this was the moment everything would start to change. The woman met her at the bottom of the stairs, holding a photograph in her hand. Her eyes were soft but filled with questions. "I think we need to talk," she said quietly. And in that instant, both women knew the truth they had been circling around had finally found them. The silence that followed was heavy. She stood frozen on the last step, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every sound in the room. The older woman's eyes were soft but full of questions. She held a photograph in her trembling hands, the same one the young woman had found earlier. "I found this today," the woman said gently. "You looked at it once before, didn't you?" She hesitated, unsure whether to lie or tell the truth. But something in the woman's voice made her feel safe. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." The woman nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving the young woman's face. "You've seemed different since that day. Tell me honestly, child, did you find something upstairs?" The air seemed to thicken. She swallowed hard. "I found some letters," she said softly. "They were written by my mother." The woman's breath caught. Her eyes widened slightly. "Your mother? What was her name?" Her voice cracked as she replied, "Lillian." The name seemed to echo through the house. The older woman's expression changed instantly. Shock, recognition, and deep emotion passing across her face all at once. She reached out, her hands trembling. "Lillian," she whispered. "My brother's wife. Your mother." The young woman stared, unable to speak. The truth hit her like a wave, powerful and overwhelming. The woman in front of her, her employer, her caretaker, was family. Real family. Tears filled both their eyes as they stood there, the truth hanging in the air between them. The older woman took her hands gently. "All these years," she said, her voice shaking. "I thought they were gone forever. Your parents left after a terrible misunderstanding. I never saw them again." Her throat tightened. "I didn't know anything," she whispered. "I grew up thinking we had no one. My mother never spoke about this house." They sat down together in the old sitting room where light streamed softly through the tall windows. Dust danced in the air like small memories come alive. The older woman, her aunt she now realized, took a deep breath before continuing. "There were arguments years ago," she began. My brother and I were close, but when he married your mother, things changed. Our parents didn't approve. Pride came between us. They left and letters stopped coming. I tried to find them, but it was like they disappeared. I thought the house would always stay empty waiting for them. The young woman listened silently, tears sliding down her cheeks. She wrote about you in her letters, she said quietly. She said she missed you. She wanted to come back one day. The older woman smiled sadly. And now you've come instead. Maybe that's how it was meant to happen. But even as the truth settled between them, a new struggle began inside her. Part of her wanted to feel joy at finding her family, but another part was filled with guilt and confusion. This house, this woman, it all felt like a dream she didn't deserve. Could she really belong here after so many years? That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by her window staring out at the moonlit street. Every question she'd tried to avoid now came rushing back. What had really happened to her parents? Why had they kept this secret? And what was she supposed to do now that the truth was out? The next morning she arrived at the house early. Her aunt greeted her with warm eyes but a heavy heart. They began sorting through boxes together, uncovering more letters, photographs, and small belongings that painted a fuller picture of the family that once lived there. Some letters spoke of reconciliation that never happened. Others were full of promises that time had erased. At one point, her aunt handed her an envelope yellowed with age. "I never had the courage to open this one," she said softly. "It came the year your parents left." With shaking hands, the young woman opened it. The letter was from her father. He wrote about wanting to make peace, about bringing his daughter, her, back to meet everyone. But before he could, tragedy struck. The words grew faint near the end, the ink blurred as if by tears. Her chest ached as she read the final line. "If she ever finds her way back home, tell her she was always loved." She clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing quietly. Her aunt reached over and held her hand. "They wanted to come home," she said gently. "And somehow through you they did." But the days that followed were not easy. The young woman wrestled with emotions she could barely name, grief for the family she lost, confusion about her place in this world, and fear of what would happen next. She still worked around the house, but now every corner carried meaning. Each item she dusted felt like a piece of her own story. Sometimes she caught her aunt watching her with quiet affection, as if memorizing her face. There was warmth between them, but also unspoken sorrow. The years apart could never be undone. One afternoon, while cleaning the garden shed, she found an old trunk. Inside were property papers and faded documents. Her name appeared on one of them, proof that the house, the land, everything had once belonged to her parents. She felt dizzy reading it. Fate had brought her here not just to work, but to reclaim what had been hers all along. That night she told her aunt what she found. The older woman smiled through tears. "I always knew this house would return to its rightful owner," she said softly. "It was never really mine. I only cared for it until the day it found you." The young woman didn't know how to respond. She didn't want the house for its value or its beauty. She wanted what it represented, a connection, a home, a sense of belonging. But even as she stood in the middle of the old living room surrounded by the weight of history, a new fear crept in. What if she wasn't ready for all this? The struggle was no longer about cleaning floors or finding steady work. It was about facing her past, accepting her identity, and learning to forgive what time had taken away. She looked around the quiet house, the creaking stairs, the soft ticking clock, the photographs that now felt like family portraits, and she whispered to herself, "I'm home." Yet deep down she knew her journey wasn't over. The truth had been uncovered, but healing would take time. There were still stories to tell, memories to mend, and a future to build from the pieces of the past. And somewhere in the stillness of that house she felt it, the gentle hum of something greater than coincidence. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing again, welcoming her back after all these years. The following days passed in a blur of emotion and discovery. The young woman felt like she was walking through pieces of her own forgotten life, each one slowly finding its place. Her aunt became warmer, more open, and the distance between them began to fade. They shared meals together, talked late into the evenings, and filled the house with quiet laughter that had been missing for years. But beneath the calm, there was something still unsettled. The truth had brought them closer, yet it had also uncovered deeper wounds that neither had fully faced. Late one night, her aunt asked her to join her in the study. The old woman looked thoughtful, almost nervous, as she set a small box on the table. "There's something you should see," she said softly. Inside the box were old letters, official papers, and one photograph she had never seen before. It showed her parents standing at the front steps of the house, holding her as a baby. They looked so happy. Her throat tightened as she ran her fingers over the image. "I kept this," her aunt said quietly. "Your mother sent it just before they left for good. I thought they'd come back one day, but they never did." The young woman looked up, tears already filling her eyes. "Do you know why they left?" Her aunt nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was a proud man. He didn't approve of your father. There were arguments, harsh words, and then silence. Your parents left with nothing. When I tried to reach them later, it was too late. They'd moved away and I couldn't find them again." The young woman closed her eyes, her chest aching. All her life she had felt the weight of absence, something missing she couldn't explain. And now she finally understood. Her parents hadn't wanted to leave this place. They had been pushed away by pride and misunderstanding. She whispered, "They wanted to come back." "I saw it in their letters," her aunt nodded. "I know. I read some of them after you showed me. I can't change the past, but I can make peace with it. And maybe you can too." The two women sat together in silence for a long time. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. The air seemed lighter now, as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath, waiting for this moment. In the following days, they continued exploring the attic and other rooms, piecing together the story of their family. Every discovery, every photograph, every letter brought them closer, not just to each other but to the truth of what the house represented. It wasn't just a home. It was the thread that tied generations together. One afternoon, while cleaning the study, the young woman found a sealed envelope hidden beneath a drawer. Her aunt helped her open it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note and a faded deed. The note was from her father, written years ago, never sent. It read, "If one day our daughter finds this house, let her know she belongs to it as much as it belongs to her. It carries our love, our mistakes, and our hope for a better tomorrow." She read the words over and over, her hands shaking. Her aunt's eyes filled with tears. "He must have left it here before they moved," she said softly. "He wanted you to have this." The realization hit her deeply. Her father had known. He had somehow believed that she would return one day, that fate would guide her back home. Every step she had taken, every job, every twist of her life had led her here to this very moment. She looked around the room, the old furniture, the shelves, the scent of polished wood mixed with time. Everything felt different now. The house was no longer a mystery. It was a message. Her parents had never really left her. Their love had stayed within these walls, waiting quietly until she was ready to find it. She turned to her aunt and smiled through her tears. "It's strange," she said softly. "I came here to clean this house, and it ended up cleaning something inside me." Her aunt reached for her hand and held it tight. "Sometimes," she said, "life brings us home in the most unexpected ways. You were meant to find this place just as it was meant to find you." They spent that evening together by the fireplace, the warm glow flickering across their faces. Her aunt shared stories about her parents, how her father used to fix the gate that always squeaked, how her mother would sing while hanging clothes to dry in the sun. The stories painted pictures so vivid that she could almost see them walking through the halls again. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. The silence was gone, replaced by the gentle sound of shared laughter and memories being restored. The young woman realized that the real treasure she had discovered wasn't the letters or the inheritance. It was family, forgiveness, and belonging. Before going to bed, she stood at the top of the staircase and looked down at the house below. The lights glowed softly, the air felt warm, and her heart was at peace. She whispered a quiet thank you to the parents she never got to say goodbye to, and to the home that had waited patiently for her return. In that moment, everything made sense. The house had been hers all along, not just by blood, but by love, by destiny, by the invisible pull that brings people back to where they truly belong. Weeks passed, and the once quiet house now felt full of life again. The young woman no longer wore her cleaning uniform, though she still moved through the rooms with the same gentle care. Every time she polished the wooden banister or opened the windows to let the morning light in, it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like love. Her aunt noticed the change too. The tension that once filled the air between them was gone, replaced by understanding and calm. They shared breakfast together every morning now. The older woman would often sit near the window sipping tea while the younger one talked about her plans. "I've been thinking," the young woman said one morning, her voice soft but steady. "I want to stay here. Not just as a guest, but to make it my home again." Her aunt smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." So they decided to start fresh. Together they painted the old walls, repaired what time had worn down, and filled the empty corners with warmth again. The garden, which had once been dry and colorless, slowly bloomed back to life. They planted flowers her mother had loved, white lilies, jasmine, and bright marigolds that glowed under the sunlight. Each corner of the house carried a story now. The old clock that once ticked in silence now marked moments of laughter. The study, where the truth had been revealed, turned into a small reading room where her aunt would spend her evenings. And the attic, once a place of dust and forgotten memories, became a gallery of their past, frames filled with photographs, letters, and keepsakes. One day, while arranging an old vase, the young woman paused and looked out the window. She could see the city beyond the trees, busy and loud, yet she felt no pull toward it anymore. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was running from something or chasing something else. She was home. Her aunt walked up beside her and said softly, "You know, this house always needed you. I think it waited until you were ready to come back." She smiled, holding back tears. "Maybe I needed it just as much." They stood there for a while, side by side, watching the light fall across the garden. The breeze carried the scent of flowers through the open window, gentle and comforting. A few months later, her aunt's health began to decline, but there was no fear in her eyes. The younger woman stayed by her side every day, reading to her, cooking her favorite meals, and talking to her about old times. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, her aunt reached out and held her hand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You gave this home its heart back. And you gave me mine too." The younger woman couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. That night, as her aunt fell asleep peacefully, the house felt calm, as though it knew that a long unfinished story had finally found its ending. After her aunt's passing, the young woman stayed in the house. Though it was quiet again, it didn't feel empty. The memories filled every space like sunlight through the curtains. She often found herself talking softly while dusting shelves or watering plants, as if her aunt were still there listening. Sometimes she would sit by the fireplace, reading the letters her parents had written, and smile. Their words no longer made her sad. Instead, they reminded her that love never really leaves, it just changes form, finding new ways to reach us. One evening, she received a letter from a distant cousin who had heard about her discovery. The cousin congratulated her on reclaiming her family's home and wrote, "Maybe this is life's way of telling us that what is meant for us will always find its way back." She placed that letter beside her father's old note, smiling at how the words connected across time. It was true. Life had brought her back here for a reason. She started opening the house to others, inviting neighbors and children from nearby schools to visit. She turned one of the rooms into a small library filled with old books and family stories. People would come to read, share tea, and listen to her talk about the house and the history it carried. She loved how their laughter echoed through the halls. It was like the house was alive again. Over time, people in the town began to call it the home that found its owner. It became a quiet symbol of second chances and destiny, how sometimes, even when life takes us far away, it has a way of guiding us back to where we truly belong. On one peaceful afternoon, she stood by the front gate, watching the golden sunlight fall over the garden. The white lilies swayed gently, just as her mother once described in her letters. The house looked almost new again, strong, warm, and full of stories. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you for waiting for me." A gentle wind moved through the trees, almost like a reply. The leaves rustled, the flowers swayed, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. In that quiet moment, she felt it again, that deep, comforting sense of belonging that can't be described in words. It was as if everything she had lost had found its way back to her piece by piece, through love, forgiveness, and time. The house had once been just a place she worked in. Now it was the heart of her world, the one her parents built. Her aunt protected, and she finally made whole again. And though the story had begun with her taking a job as a simple housekeeper, it ended with something far greater, the rediscovery of home, of roots, and of herself. As night fell and the lights inside began to glow softly, she closed the gate behind her, looked up at the stars, and whispered with peace in her voice, "I'm home." Months passed peacefully. The young woman had settled into a calm rhythm of life within the old house. She cared for it with love, opening its doors to the sunlight every morning and closing them each night with quiet gratitude. Every corner of the home felt alive now, like it had a heartbeat that matched her own. She had learned to live alone but never felt lonely. The memories of her parents and her aunt still surrounded her like a warm embrace. Sometimes, when she sat in the study at dusk, she would imagine their voices, soft, familiar, guiding her still. One rainy afternoon, as she was sorting through a box of old records her aunt had left behind, she found something strange, a small key taped beneath the wooden lid. It was silver, old-fashioned, and slightly rusted. Curious, she walked around the house, trying to see if it fit anywhere. None of the doors or drawers seemed right. Then she remembered the small shed behind the garden, one she had never managed to open because the lock had always been jammed. She took the key outside. The rain had slowed to a drizzle and the air smelled of wet earth and lilies. The lock turned with a soft click and the door creaked open. Inside, dust filled the air like smoke and faint sunlight slipped through the broken window. At first glance, it looked like a forgotten storage space, old trunks, gardening tools, and boxes piled high. But as she brushed away the cobwebs, something caught her eye. A trunk covered in a faded blue cloth with her father's initials carved into the side. Her heart raced. She knelt down and lifted the lid. Inside were old notebooks, a few of her mother's scarves, and several tapes wrapped carefully in plastic. There was also a camera, the kind that used real film. It looked worn but cared for. With trembling hands, she opened one of the notebooks. The handwriting was her father's, firm and clear. The pages were filled with notes, sketches, and memories. At the very end, there was a single line written in faded ink. "If you ever find this, know that every story begins and ends with home." Tears blurred her eyes. She gently took one of the tapes inside and placed it into a small player she found nearby. The sound was muffled at first, but then she heard her father's voice, warm, gentle, and filled with life. He was talking to her mother, laughing softly about how one day their daughter might see this place and know it was built with love. Hearing their voices after so many years made her heart ache and heal all at once. It felt as though the house itself was speaking through them, sharing one last secret it had kept safe for her. When the tape ended, she sat quietly in the shed, listening to the rain tapping against the roof. She whispered, "I found it, Dad. I found everything." Over the next few days, she carefully restored the camera and developed the film. The pictures that came out were faded but beautiful. Images of her parents smiling in the garden, her mother holding her as a baby, her aunt standing proudly beside them. Some photos even showed the house being built, brick by brick, with their laughter frozen in time. She framed a few of them and hung them in the hallway. Every time she walked past, she felt surrounded by love that had never truly left. One morning, as she was cleaning the porch, she noticed a car stop at the gate. A young man stepped out holding a letter in his hand. He looked nervous but polite. "Excuse me," he said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I think this used to be my grandfather's home." The woman looked surprised. "Your grandfather?" He nodded and explained that his grandfather used to work as a carpenter in the same neighborhood and helped build parts of this house many decades ago. "He passed away recently," the young man said softly. "And before he died, he told me to come here to see it. He said this place taught him what real kindness looked like." The woman felt a chill of recognition. She invited him inside and offered tea. As they talked, she realized his grandfather was the same man her parents had written about in one of their letters, a kind worker who had helped them rebuild the back porch after a storm, refusing payment because, as he said, "You can't put a price on a good heart." The young man shared stories passed down from his grandfather, how he always spoke of a family that treated him like their own. The woman listened with quiet emotion. The threads of their lives, separated by generations, were somehow tied together again, right here, in this same house. Before leaving, the young man handed her the letter his grandfather had written. It said, "If you ever meet the owners of that old house again, tell them I never forgot their kindness. That home was more than walls. It was proof that love leaves marks that never fade. Her eyes filled with tears as she folded the letter. The words echoed everything she had come to believe. The house had not only carried her family's story, it had held pieces of others too. It had been a witness to love, to loss, and to the kind of quiet goodness that outlives people. After he left, she stood for a long time in the garden, the sun breaking through the clouds. She looked at the house, at its walls that had seen so much life, and whispered, "You've kept so many stories safe." And as the wind moved through the trees, she felt something shift inside her, a deeper peace than ever before. The house was no longer just her inheritance. It was a living memory, a home for everyone whose lives had touched it in some way. That evening, she sat by the fireplace and added one more photo to the collection in the attic, herself standing beside the young man, both smiling in front of the house. Underneath, she wrote in small, simple handwriting, "The stories never end. They just find new hearts to live in." She looked around the room at the flickering light, the warmth, and the quiet hum of the world outside. The journey that had begun with a simple job had led her back to the roots of everything she had ever searched for. And as night fell softly across the home, she knew with complete certainty that some places don't just belong to us, we belong to them. Years drifted by like pages turning in a calm book. The house, once forgotten and empty, now stood proudly at the edge of the town, surrounded by blooming gardens and soft laughter. The young woman, no longer so young now, had grown into the keeper of the home's stories. Every room held her touch, every wall carried echoes of her family's love. She had started a small community program inside the house called Home of Memories. Every weekend, people came, some to listen, some to share, and some just to sit quietly with a cup of tea and remember the ones they had lost. The house became a place where strangers became friends, where silence turned into understanding, and where every story, no matter how small, found a place to belong. Children often ran through the garden, their laughter bouncing off the walls, and she would smile watching them from the porch. She had planted more flowers over the years, roses for her aunt, lilies for her mother, and sunflowers for her father. Each bloom was like a whisper from the past, reminding her that love never fades. It simply grows in new directions. One spring afternoon, as she sat by the same window her aunt once loved, she noticed a little girl standing outside the gate. The girl was clutching a worn-out notebook and looking shyly toward the house. The woman went outside and asked gently, "Are you looking for someone?" The girl nodded. "My teacher said there's a lady here who listens to stories." The woman smiled. "That must be me. Would you like to come in?" The girl hesitated, then stepped inside. She sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs nervously. "My grandmother passed away," she said softly. "She used to tell me stories every night. I don't want to forget them." The woman's heart ached, but she smiled kindly. "Then let's write them down together. That way you'll never lose them." And so they began to write. The girl spoke slowly, recalling the tales her grandmother once told, and the woman wrote each word carefully in the notebook. By the time they finished, the sun had set and the house was filled with a gentle calm. The girl looked up and whispered, "Thank you." The woman placed a hand over the notebook and said, "One day you'll tell these stories to someone else." That's how love stays alive. After the girl left, the woman walked through the quiet house, holding the notebook close. She paused by the old photograph wall in the hallway. Rows of faces, smiles frozen in time, each one a reminder of how far she had come. She added a new photo there, of the little girl sitting at the kitchen table, her face lit by afternoon sunlight. Later that evening, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the garden glowing softly under the moonlight. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine, and the world felt peaceful. She thought about her parents, her aunt, and all the people whose lives had crossed paths with this home. "This place," she whispered, "wasn't just meant for me. It was meant for everyone who needed to remember that they belong somewhere." A breeze swept through the garden, stirring the flowers, and she felt that same quiet presence she had felt many times before, as though the house itself was listening, smiling and thanking her in return. As the years went on, she continued to welcome people, travelers, neighbors, lost souls, each bringing a story, each leaving a little piece of their heart behind. The home that once held one woman's forgotten past had become a place of healing for many. And though time changed everything around her, the heart of the house remained the same, steady, warm, alive. One evening, as the sky turned orange with sunset, she sat at her writing desk and began to write her own story. She started from the beginning, the day she first came to the house as a housekeeper, unaware that she was walking into her own history. She wrote for hours, the words flowing easily now, like water finally finding its path. When she finished, she read the last line aloud. "I came here to clean someone else's house, but in the end, it was this house that cleaned my soul." She closed the notebook gently and smiled. The lights flickered softly around her, and the house seemed to hum with quiet contentment. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, and in that sound, she felt everything: her parents' laughter, her aunt's gentle voice, and the countless stories that had filled these walls. It was all here. It had always been here. As the stars began to appear one by one, she leaned back in her chair and whispered into the calm night, "Thank you for finding me." The house stood silent and strong, holding her words, her memories, and her love within its walls, forever. And just like that, what began as one woman's simple job became a timeless story of belonging, forgiveness, and home, the kind of story that lives on long after the last light fades. Years turned quietly into decades. The once young woman grew older, her hair silver like the soft morning light that filled her home each day. The house around her had aged too, but it wore its years gracefully. The paint had faded in some corners. The wood creaked a little more. Yet it still stood tall and warm, a living memory, breathing through every season. By now, everyone in the town knew her simply as the lady of the old house. Children waved to her from the gate. Neighbors dropped by with fruit or flowers, and travelers passing through often stopped just to admire the garden that never stopped blooming. The lilies, jasmine, and sunflowers still grew strong, their roots deep, their petals open toward the sun. Inside, the walls were covered with photographs, generations of faces, laughter frozen in time. Some were family, others were strangers who had once walked through her doors seeking comfort or kindness. She remembered every story behind those smiles. Every visitor had left something behind, a story, a memory, a spark of connection. One afternoon, as she sat by the window with a cup of tea, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. A young woman appeared at the gate, holding the hand of a small boy. She looked hesitant, almost nervous, but there was something familiar in her eyes. "Hello," the older woman greeted warmly. "Come in, dear." The young woman smiled shyly. "You might not remember me," she began. "I came here many years ago. When I was a little girl, I used to write stories with you." The older woman's face softened with recognition. "You're the girl with the notebook," she said, her eyes lighting up. "You came to tell me your grandmother's stories." The young woman nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, and now, this is my son. I wanted him to see the house I always told him about." The older woman's heart swelled. She knelt down to meet the boy's curious gaze. "Welcome home," she said gently. "This place loves visitors with kind hearts." The boy grinned and ran off into the garden, chasing a butterfly among the flowers. The two women watched him, the air filled with soft laughter and the sweet scent of blossoms. The young woman turned to her. "I became a writer," she said quietly. "Those stories we wrote together, they helped me find my voice. I published a book about this house, about you." The older woman smiled, her eyes misty. "About me?" The young woman nodded. "About how one home can hold more love than a lifetime. People read it all over the world now. They write to me saying it reminds them of places they've lost, or the people they still hope to find." The older woman looked around the house, touched by the thought. "So the stories are still traveling," she whispered. "Yes," the young woman said softly. "Because of you." They spent the afternoon talking, sharing memories and tea. The older woman listened to the young writer's adventures, proud of how far she had come. It felt like the house had raised not just her, but all those who ever entered it. As evening came, the sky painted itself in shades of orange and gold. The boy ran inside, carrying a small flower he had picked from the garden. "For you," he said, placing it in the older woman's hand. She smiled, brushing his hair gently. "Thank you, my dear. You know, every flower in this garden grows from love that never leaves. The boy tilted his head. So it's like magic? The woman chuckled softly. Something even better. It's memory. Later, when they left, the young woman hugged her tightly. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. For giving me stories to believe in. The older woman held her hand and said, Promise me you'll keep them alive. Every story you tell keeps this house breathing. I promise, the young woman replied. That night, as the house settled into its quiet rhythm, the older woman walked through its familiar halls. The photographs glowed softly under the lamplight. She paused by one, her younger self standing in front of the house the day she first arrived. Wearing a plain uniform and holding a small suitcase, it felt like another lifetime. She smiled, whispering to her reflection in the glass, You were just looking for work, but what you found was everything. She went to bed with peace in her heart, the moonlight pouring through the curtains. Outside, the garden swayed gently in the night breeze, the flowers glowing faintly in the silver light. The next morning, the sun rose like a promise. Birds sang outside the window and the air was warm and golden. The house stood still and beautiful, surrounded by life. In the years that followed, the young writer continued to visit. After the older woman passed peacefully in her sleep, the house was left to her, not through papers or laws, but through love and memory. She cared for it the same way it had once cared for her. She kept it open for others, just as the older woman had done. People still came to share stories, to cry, to heal, to find peace. And whenever someone asked her why she did it, she would simply smile and say, Because some homes don't belong to us, we belong to them. The house remained, strong and alive through changing seasons and generations. Children still ran through the garden, laughter still filled the air, and somewhere, in the quiet hum of the walls, the voices of those who once lived there could still be felt. Gentle, loving, eternal. And so the story went on, not as an ending, but as a continuation of everything that began the moment a young woman took a simple job as a housekeeper and found her way back home.